All right, guys, we're going live here for the weekly Mac Forum video chat, September 28th, 2014. Hope that you enjoy the show this evening. Coming up in just a minute, we'll have the usual site statistics here in just a second. And Rad Dave won't be with us tonight. He's out enjoying himself and having a bite to eat. One of these days, I got to figure out how that guy can do that and not gain any weight. Okay, I eat something, I explode. Rad Dave looks the same. Okay, so I got to figure out how he's doing that. There's some kind of secret thing that he's not telling me. Hopefully, in just a few minutes, our buddy Jake, also known to you in the forum as MacInWin, will be here. We're planning on, if I send him the right link, he should be here in just a bit. So hopefully he'll be here. I want to have him talk a little bit about the tip that he gave us for dealing with iTunes and dead tracks that we discussed a little bit. And I thought it would just be a good idea to have him join us for a couple of things and see where we go with that. He has said that he'd like to be here, so hopefully he'll be here in just a little bit. So we'll kind of get a few preliminaries out of the way while we're waiting. I sent him the link just a minute ago. Had a little detour right before showtime, so he might have gotten it a minute or two after we started. Jake, if you're listening, check your email. I sent the link your way a few minutes ago. And that gets us off to a good start for tonight. I'll save the discussion of the iTunes tips just in case he gets here. I want to start out by saying, as we've done the last couple of weeks, I pulled up the site statistics for the week, and right before the show, shortly before the show, and looks like as of about an hour and a half before the show, we had a total of 279,089 threads. Those threads contained a total of 1,543,043 posts. And those posts have been made by 281,574 members. Our newest looks like Lucariel 91. So I want to welcome them and all the new members to the show and to the forum. Don't forget, keep those questions coming. We enjoy answering questions on the show. And I see Jake. Looks like as
you did. Nope, just fine. Okay, well, I have a house full of Macs. My first one that I bought was a 2008 iMac. I bought it because I was in Micro Center looking for a replacement PC because my PC had just gotten slower and slower and slower. And I happened to walk past the Apple section, and I saw this big, beautiful Mac running Windows. And I stepped in and said, "Can I play with it?" And the guy said, "Sure." I played with it for about 5 minutes and realized it was actually running Windows better than it had ever run on any PC. So I walked out of the store with the iMac and stunned my wife with it when I got home. And then she has a business that she runs, so her laptop got slower and slower. So I bought her a I think it's a 13-inch MacBook Pro, and then a Mac Mini. I have a 17-inch MacBook Pro for myself, and then we have two iPhones, two iPads, and an Apple TV. So yeah, we're all fanboys over here. Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, I'm a latecomer to the system. I did look at when the very first Macintosh came out. I looked at the original Unibody, and I couldn't figure out the interface. They kept saying it was intuitive and everything, but there wasn't a help guy in the store that knew how to make it work. And I looked, I clicked on everything and couldn't get anything to happen. So I said, okay, well, it must be some secret, and walked away. Didn't look back until I happened to see it running, and nobody showed me the secret handshake, so I didn't get into it until they were well into the intels. And but I'm thoroughly enjoying it now. I love the no antivirus, nothing to worry about. Just it works. Right, right. Yeah, and that's really the big advantage here. Is it just, and I think part of it is that hardware for hardware, assuming that you could duplicate the Apple hardware, you probably could if you were willing to spend the same amount of money. But hardware for hardware, OS 10 just runs so much faster because, for one thing, you're not burdening it down with a lot of antivirus scanning and screening and everything else. And the system is inherently more secure than Windows ever was, which I knew from the days of. I'd been in IT for 35 years, and we had Unix systems everywhere. And if you knew how, if you just did any reasonable security at all, you could plug all the holes in Unix pretty well. I was around when the original Morris worm crawled through the network, and I was at a university. I remember I was at a university, and the dean of administration called me all in a panic because the Morris worm, he'd heard about it and what was going on. I told him we're all covered. We plugged all those holes well before Mr. Morris wrote his worm. So uh, I did. I think I said it in the forum at one point. Well, the engineering guys liked everything high, wide, and handsome so that they could just go anywhere they wanted to go. And we were on the administrative side of the university trying to protect things like grades and real legal stuff rather than just having fun with engineering. And the engineering department hated, they didn't want to lock up anything. And so, comes the day of the Morris worm, all the whole engineering department's on its knees, and the admin guys are just running just fine. So,
routines took a little time to run,
mm-hmm.
and there was no indication that anything was going on. In other words, there was no error message or anything that said, I'm processing, give me a minute, whatever. All you got was the little blinking cursor. and being an Apple II user, to me, when I saw the blinking cursor, that means that DOS has run home to mama, and it's time to force the system to reboot. So when I saw this, I said to him, I said, do you need to restart? And he says, no, it's thinking. And I said, okay, I'll take you at your word for it. I understand that. You understand that. But if you're going to upload this to any of the software sites, you're going to need to put a message in there that says, go away for a minute, I'll ding when I'm done, because most computer users at that time, and this is certainly not an insult, were not savvy enough to think that way. I mean, in their minds, the little blinking cursor meant we're done. We're done for. We're hosed. And I find that as he has moved, not really moved away because he still uses Windows on a regular basis, but as he's moved more and more toward Mac stuff, because now he's got several iPads and he's got an iPhone. He uses FaceTime now. I have very little reason to have Skype on my computer because he was the only person I knew that was using Skype. As he's moved farther and farther away from Windows, he's starting to see the value of putting the polish, so to speak, on that user interface so you don't, chew
right.
Get your user so confused they don't know which end is up.
Yep, absolutely. So, and that's my background there for you, and that's the idea of putting polish on programs is absolutely important because the average, and I'll say, you said non-savvy, I'll say unsophisticated buyer, they buy the interface. And so if you give them a nice clean interface, they don't care how efficient or inefficient the guts of the engine are. They just, oh, it's pretty, it's blinking, it's telling me it's working, it's doing a good thing. So.
And I remember when some of the original iMacs came out, I call them the jelly bean ones that were different colors, and they, that was the thing. A lot of the press, particularly the popular press, if you read like New York Times and all these, the tech press was talking about the chip and whether the PowerPC processor could handle it, what it could do, what it couldn't do. But the for lack of a better word, the rest of the press was talking about, ooh, these things look neat.
Right.
And I'm sure there were some people that bought them strictly on the basis that they looked neat. And my wife is one of those groups of people that loved that group of Macs because they were virtually, I hate to use this term because it always offends people, but they were almost idiot-proof.
Mm-hmm.
If you look back about that time, Apple started including less and less documentation with the machines because most people really could get them up and running in a matter of a few minutes.
Right. People don't read the manual anyway, so it's hardly any point in killing trees and printing it. So.
Well, you know what my response is when I buy something and I don't read the manual, and my wife complains about that. what I tell her is the manual is merely the manufacturer's suggestions for how I should put this up. You know.
It's a court of last resort. If everything else fails, I might open the manual.
There you go. You know, when I think back to one of the first Macs that we owned was an LC2 running System 7, and we were using Microsoft Office as the Office suite, and literally there were hardcover manuals that took, if you'll think of the length of a typical bookshelf, you know, the width of a typical bookshelf, that collection of hardcover manuals for Microsoft Excel took up half to three-quarters of a shelf.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it had the function reference for their macro language, and then it had probably 1,000 pages or so of manuals for the various programs. And then all of a sudden, they went to this idea where they shifted the next incarnation, went to manuals on CD. And as technical as I am, I still, to this day, if I'm going to read a technical manual, I have trouble reading it from the screen. And it's not the reading, it's the fact that, well, good example, I went to program a macro once, and in the process, and I found a lot of information by virtue of the stumble upon it factor.
Right.
I would be looking at one function and look down at the description, and they would have related function. They would say, okay, if you want to do this, look at this function that's related. And you go to that function, and here's another one. Well, if you stumble around enough, you know, what's that old saying about even a blind squirrel will find a nut once in a while, you know?
Exactly.
And that's harder to do when the documentation is on CD.
Right.
You don't necessarily know what to look for. It's great if you know what the functions are. But if you're starting from scratch like I was, it's not so good.
Yes, it's the serendipity of just flipping the page and saying, there's something I didn't know. That'll fix something I didn't even know I needed to fix.
Right, exactly.
And,
of course, you know, several years later and multiple incarnations of the macro later, I still didn't get it quite working the way I wanted it to. Came close, but hey, you know.
Close counts.
Well, yeah, it to be honest, it worked fine for me, would not work for my wife.
Yes. Yes. The sensor.
It took me forever to figure out why it was not working for her. I knew something about the setup, and that I had not even realized was important, in that you had to be starting on a particular page of the workbook. And I didn't realize that I had been doing that all along.
Okay.
And it drove her nuts until one night I figured out why it wasn't working. And by the time I did that, she didn't need it anymore, so, you know.
Yep. I understand.
Listen, honey, bad interface design.
Well, hey, you know, it's a Microsoft product. What do you expect?
You want to talk about
interface in the hands of somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, and that's what you get, you know?
Well, yeah. But you know, there are also assumptions that the programmer makes, much like your friend who was leaving the cursor blinking because he knew what it meant. You know, to the average user thinks, okay, it went home somewhere. I guess I need to restart or reboot or do something.
Right.
Didn't wait for it. So it's all, the user interface is 99% of the problem, I think, in most software, is that it's just not clear, it doesn't communicate well, the controls are not logical. And
okay, you've obviously given some thought to this. I want to ask you something. It's going to revive something that was being debated a couple of months ago, but here goes. When Apple made the shift in iOS, they started probably with the beginning of iOS 7, and I think they've continued it going into 8. They moved away from skeuomorphism.
yes.
the program looks less and less like the thing it's supposed to look like. You know, the notepad, for example, in iOS 6 looked like a legal pad.
Right.
And I, for a long time, have thought that for people just starting, that idea of making something look like the thing it's supposed to be was a great idea. You know,
I think I agree with you for the user who's never picked up the interface before.
Right.
You know, you've got an icon that looks like a telephone. Yep. All right. I tap that. Look, it's a telephone. I've got one that looks like a notepad. I tap it, and guess what? I can take notes. Exactly what I want to do. And so for the real novice user, I understand that. I think that part of what's happening now is I'm not sure there are any more novice users in the world because the iPhone has been around so long and the interface has now become so ubiquitous. Obviously, not only on Apple devices, but on all those lovely copies that are on Samsung devices and Android devices everywhere, that pretty much anybody can pick it up and say, okay, I know how to make this work. I read a book one time about design that said the best design ever was the original black telephone because you never needed a manual. It was intuitive how you used it. You didn't have to be told what to do. You picked it up, and it worked.
I think I read the same comment, and they were right about that. Along a similar note, I remember there was a book, probably in the late 70s. I know I'm going to get the date wrong. I think the author's name was Goldenberg, and he was talking about using technology for, I think he called it special technology for special people or something like that, technology for use with the disabled, you know, back in the days when they were first starting to look at that. And he summarized his philosophy about technology by saying something to this effect. When you put on a pair of glasses, they don't get in the way. They help you do something that you normally would be able to do without them.
Right.
And within a matter of minutes or hours, nobody has to tell you how to use the glasses.
Right.
You know, once you learn how to clean them, assuming they fit properly and are the right prescription, once you learn how to clean them, that's about all you need to know about how to use the glasses.
Exactly.
And computers have not quite hit that point yet.
No, but you know they're getting closer. One of my I'm also a ham radio operator, and I started many years ago in radio. And it used to be you had to do all sorts of fancy things to transmit and get the frequency set right and do all the things you had to do. And nowadays they're basically appliances. You know, it's no more complex in many ways than turning on the kitchen stove.
And see, I started looking at getting the ham radio license in the late 70s. I thought about it. I was in the Boy Scouts at the time, and you could get a merit badge for being a ham radio operator, and I thought, I read up a little bit on being, you know, ham radio, and I thought, boy, this was kind of cool. But then I started looking, and you had to be, you know, you had to be fluent or at least proficient in Morse code.
Yes.
At that time to get a license, and I'm as clumsy as the day is long. Okay, I would not make a good coder in Morse code. You know, just and it took me just a little bit of time jerking around with Morse code to figure out that this was not probably the hobby for me. You know. And all my friends kept saying, well, you know, it won't be that long before you get to where you can do a voice. You know, you can do voice and you won't have to screw with Morse code. I'm like, forget it.
Yeah, well, nowadays I will say they've done away with the Morse code requirement, but the equipment, the equipment is so much more automated that things that I used to have to worry about, you know, I won't go into all the technical stuff, but the bottom line is you don't have to, you know, do it anymore. So in many respects it's become an appliance, and I think the same thing is happening for most people that
With
the phone is an appliance. They want to go into the store, they want to buy a phone, they want to take 10 minutes to find out how to turn it on, and then the rest of it's intuitively obvious. And at this point, that interface, going back to skeuomorphism, I think that the interface that Apple had built at the time was new and different, and so I think the skeuomorphism helped people understand how this interface worked. Now I think that it is so ubiquitous that I'm not sure, except for
a new user would outgrow it quickly now.
Yes, I think so. And and so what Apple has done now is return to its sleek, flat look that it's had for years and years and years, and they've just gone back to it. And you hear people saying, "Oh, they've lost all that wonderful, fancy look." Well, it doesn't bother me because it's an appliance. You know how it works. A phone. It's not. Right. I mean, the thing is, it's not exactly rocket science. You turn it on, it works, or you make the phone calls. I haven't been mystified by it in a long time. So.
And the only downside to not having the documentation is that there are aspects of it. The basics of getting your phone up and running can be done in no time. But there are aspects of it that are not necessarily, no matter how you do it, there's always going to be someone that doesn't understand a particular feature. For example, I'll make a bet with you. When Yosemite comes out and goes final and is finally released, I can almost guarantee you which feature we're going to get the most support requests from in the forum.
All right.
I think I know what it's going to be. That there's a function in that they demoed at the keynote called handoff.
Right.
Where if you've got an iPhone running iOS 8 and you've got a Mac running Yosemite, you can pass a phone call, a FaceTime call from the iPhone or the iPad over to the Mac or vice versa. It's not that hard to do. It's not that hard to set up. I've been playing with the beta, and I finally put iOS 8 on my iPad. It's not hard to get handoff working, but the one thing, and I've already seen one post about this in the forum, let's say that for a variety of convenience reasons, all of your devices are using the same Apple ID.
Okay.
If you've got handoff functioning, it's going to pass that ring to all of those devices, whether you want them to or not.
Yes.
Yes, and not everybody realizes that. They set it up, for example, for convenience. Maybe they're providing support for, say, a parent, an elderly parent who, is still mastering this stuff. And so they set it up all with one Apple ID for convenience of purchases and things like that. And that's fine until one day you're over at your parents' and your phone links up with their network. You get a phone call, and because you've got handoff turned on, it pops up on all of their phones. And That's great, unless it's the kind of call that you don't necessarily want your parents knowing about.
Yes, that's a problem. I think that's the other one, and I think that's probably why Apple has gone away from or come up with the family sharing plan, which now what you can do is to say, we can still share downloads and software, so forth, Mom. But you get your own Apple ID now and do it. Here's what you need to do.
Right.
We'll share it. We'll share things across this family of ours.
And I like that. Several years ago, Apple had back in the days when the OS was still distributed on CD and DVD, they had the family pack.
Right.
You could install on up to 5 machines.
Yep.
For less than the price of buying 5 separate copies, and I've always thought that was much more forward thinking than what was going on in Windows at the time, where you had to have, if you had 5 devices running Windows, you had to have 5 separate copies of Windows.
Yep. Yeah, and so I think what I was saying though is that Apple probably came up with the family sharing because they knew they were going to have that exactly the issue that you talked about. That if you shared the Apple ID with your mom so that she could buy things through your Apple ID, and you walked into your house and the phone went into that sharing mode, everybody would get the handover mode. Every phone in the house would ring when your phone rang, and that's
Right.
they probably said, not a good idea. That could lead to trouble. So what we'll do is we'll let everybody give mom a different ID, but now you can family share
The
those
content. Yeah.
the content of those and not do the ringing.
And you know, I like that idea because when the iPads first came out, I was still writing for about this particular Macintosh at the time. And I remember saying that one of the things that Apple needed, because at that time, if you were going to have an iPad, you had to have a computer to tether it to make OS updates and transfer content and all that. And I said something at the time that I did not realize there was probably some engineer in Cupertino that was already thinking in this direction. That what you needed was the equivalent of a digital filling station. In other words, let's say that for a parent, say an elderly parent, they love the idea of an iPad, but they don't want a computer to tether it to.
Okay, yeah,
But without that computer, they couldn't do the iPad.
Right.
Well, now because of in the cloud,
Yep.
and iCloud, you can.
Yep.
You know,
exactly.
If you download something on the iPad and your iPad gets borked up, your download is in the cloud.
Yep.
So as long as you've got a connection, either at home or at a Starbucks or an Apple store, wherever it happens to be, you can get your get your content back.
Get all your stuff back. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that particular function saved me, as I was telling you earlier. That saved me this summer when I had my iTunes library go down off of a NAS device, and it took me quite a while because for the first couple of weeks I was still working, did not have time to mess with restoring it, but it took me quite a while to restore, and I did some of it off of DVDs that I had, backup DVDs that I had, and some of it I restored because my buddy reminded me, my Windows using buddy reminded me that I could go in and re-download my iTunes purchases from the iTunes store without having to pay for them all over again.
Right.
Which was really handy because that was a significant chunk of my library, things that I had acquired over a period of several years.
Yes. And the idea that as the iCloud becomes more ubiquitous, and again, I think a little more friendly. I think Apple still needs to work on the friendliness of the iCloud, but the idea that your software is all, or your tunes are all out there if you need them, and you're able to restore them is brilliant. But that you could end up, and that's I think what I'd like to lead to is in the problem of that poster that asked, okay, I think, as I recall, I think he moved his library and he ended up with a bunch of references inside iTunes that no longer pointed to the physical tracks.
Right.
And as I recall, he had re-imported all of his tracks, but now he had duplicates on everything, and he was faced with going through and eliminating every duplicate.
Right, exactly.
And then you can end up in that problem any number of ways. I can think the easiest is to move the library. Your recovery process could have ended up in the same way.
It did, believe me, a couple of times. And another way that you can end up in that situation is if you have your library. Now, iTunes has gotten a lot better about this, but up until a couple of iterations ago, let's say you had your iTunes library on either an external hard drive connected to your computer or a NAS drive.
Right.
You launched iTunes, but that drive isn't available right now. You haven't powered it up, the network's down, whatever reason. iTunes would default to your home user folder looking for the music and couldn't find it. And you would see all these tracks, these dead tracks with exclamation points because iTunes couldn't find the content. And it took me a while of dealing with that to realize that all I had to do to quote unquote fix the problem was shut down iTunes, power up my drive, whatever it was, and then relaunch iTunes again, and it would fix itself. But for a while there, I was, going through hundreds of tracks saying, okay, that's a dead one, got to get rid of that, got to get rid of that. But then, of course, you outsmarted me and everybody else.
Well, I mean, I as I told you earlier today, this hint that I came up with, the tip that I came up with, wasn't totally original to me. I read it somewhere a long time ago when a guy was trying to keep track of all of his lost tracks for podcasts, and he simply said, you can always go in, edit a field, and the ones it doesn't find, it'll report back, I couldn't find them. So on the tip as it was written in the forum was that if you've got a bunch of dead tracks in iTunes and you want to eliminate them, what you do is you just put iTunes in your music in any list view. I don't know if it works in the icons view, but I know it works in the list view. And then do select all, and then right-click on any one of them, and you'll get queried whether or not you want to edit them all. You answer that yes, I want to edit them all. And then you pick some field in the resulting. You can pick any field you want in the resulting page to edit. Most of the fields there are more important. It's like track name and album name and so forth. But one that I found,
one of those.
You don't want to change those. But one of them that I did look before I started this, and I only have about 1,500 tracks. I don't have a ton of music, but I looked on mine, and none of them had the information in it. Was beats per minute, BPM. And so I selected beats per minute and thought, well, I'll just put in anything because there's nothing in there now. So put something ridiculous like 999, and then you tell it, yes, I want you to change all of them. And iTunes flashes into action, and your drives light up, and life goes on. And then it reports back, we're all done. But when you look in your iTunes list, the only ones that got changed to 999 were the ones where it actually found the track.
Right.
Because if it doesn't find the track, it can't make the change.
It can't make the change.
Can't make the change. So
because
then
that metadata about artist and all of that information, beats per minute, all of that is stored within the track itself.
Exactly. So then you can sort iTunes on that column, and it puts all the 999s together and all the blanks that it didn't find together, and then it's a simple process. Select all the blanks, right-click, delete. It won't ask you, as I recall, it didn't even ask, do you want to leave the track behind, because it already knew the track wasn't there.
Right.
If you delete a track and you delete it out of iTunes, it asks you if you want to leave the file in place. But since it didn't find the file, I don't think it even prompts you.
No, it doesn't.
And then you just say click, delete.
If it doesn't find the file, that pointer is gone, and you don't even get the second dialogue that says
exactly
delete the file.
Exactly. And so you just say, click on delete. It whirs for a few minutes, and lo and behold, all the blank ones go away. Now you just repeat the process of selecting them all, going back to beats per minute, and erase the 999, and just say leave it null, leave it empty.
Right. And I like that one because it uses. I thought about doing it after I read your hint. I thought about doing it with the comments field.
Yes.
And I don't recommend that for one reason. In my collection, for example, I've done two things to the comments field that maybe some people don't do. On some of my more like classic rock tracks and things like that, I have put in the comments field, there might be something special about that particular album.
Right.
This is a rare version that was produced in such and such place. Normally, I don't care about that, but once in a while, there is something there that I want to know. That goes into the comments field. So if you use the comments field, you're gonna blow that out of the water. And the other thing that I use the comment field for is I have several playlists that are based on a particular genre of music, blues, zydeco, whatever. And on some genres, like zydeco, the tagging is really inconsistent. In other words, from one artist it may say zydeco, on another artist it may say world music, and on a third one it says something different. And so rather than trying to change genres and worry about all of that, what I did, because when you go to do a smart playlist, it kind of matters what that genre is tagged as. What I did is I left the general genre tag with whatever they set it to, and in the comment field, if I had an alternate form of music that I wanted it included with, like zydeco, I'd put it in the comments.
Right.
And then I built my smart playlist to say, look at the genre field, and then also look at the content field. If it contains this, put it in this playlist. So I wouldn't want to use comments because for me, that would alter some tracks that I don't want to alter. But beats per minute is great because I don't have anything altered and couldn't really think of a good use for the beats per minute thing, you know?
The only thing I could think of is maybe if you're a DJ or if you're trying to do some mixing, you might have some things in beats per minute. And then you got to be careful because obviously if you do a global change to beats per minute, you're globally changing beats per minute. You might have to do something about going back through and putting those numbers. You could use rating. If you don't use rating, you could
exactly.
I'm looking at it now online and I'm thinking, you know, it's got artist, album, grouping, composer, comments, genre, rating, and a couple other things. You know, anything that's unimportant to you that you don't mind losing the data on is a field. Just the point is, ask iTunes to edit all of them, and the ones it can't find, it won't edit.
Right.
And then you get to sort them and delete them. I can't, you know, if beats per minute's important to you, then they've got track numbers and disc numbers and all kinds of things that you might be able to play with if you don't have multi-disc collections or. But you got to be careful because when you say you want to change them all, it's going to change them all, and there's no undo.
I should have. I wished you had been able to be here last week because we could have called it the Jake Show. Because the second tip that I used, with appropriate credit, of course, was the comment that you made about Migration Assistant.
Right.
I don't use Migration Assistant very often, so in that thread where the one user now has two accounts and he's trying to figure out how to get everything married back together the way it was, when I read his post the first time, I didn't realize what had happened. And so I didn't answer it. A lot of times generally speaking, the only way I will answer a post is if it's either like a hello, how you doing kind of thing.
Right.
If I think I know the answer, or if it's obvious that we need more information. If I don't know, then a lot of times I just don't say anything, which, as you can tell, is a difficult thing for me to do, but I show a little restraint sometimes. And when I read his post the first time, something just didn't click as to what had gone wrong. And when I went back the second time to the thread, you had answered.
Right.
And your description not only solved the problem, but it was a good description of why that problem, what the problem was, and what causes it. So could you just kind of walk our viewers through that?
Sure. So Migration Assistant is a great tool for restoring from after a hard drive crash and you put a new one in or you bought a new machine and you want it to look like your old one or move your files over. It's a fantastic tool from Apple. But you have to really read Apple's documentation very, very carefully because it says right in there, it's twisted in the words, but it says right in there that the way to use Migration Assistant with a brand new machine is not to create an account, to just fire up the new machine, answer the few questions about region and keyboards and so forth, and then immediately kick off Migration Assistant. And what Migration Assistant then does is it goes and connects to you that source for you. You go through that handshaking, and it starts to bring all the files over, and it puts them into a file and a username based on that material where it's coming from. So if you
Right.
already had a Windows account of old user, we'll use that for your name, and you brought it into your Mac now using Migration Assistant, you would now have an account called old user. You'd be able to log in just like you did before, and voila, all your stuff is there.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you simply get to that question where it says, hey, if you want to migrate, now's the time to do it. I forget the exact prompt Apple put in, but if you want to migrate, do it now, but you can always do it later. Would you like to create a new account? 99.9% of the new users are going to click on, yeah, I want to create a new account. Click.
Yeah.
Now you're past that point. And so you go in and you create your new user, you play around with it, you get it set up exactly the way you want. Now you want to go do the migration. Well, Apple is smart enough in writing Migration Assistant to say we're not going to take a chance that anything we migrate in is going to overwrite anything that you've put on this new system. And so it goes out and does its, even though you're logged in as new user and you're triggering this migration, it migrates everything to old user account and creates a whole new account for you, sets up all the permissions for old user because that's what it knows, and your files are all there. They're just not where you can get to them because they're under old user and not new user.
And you know, I have, because I didn't pay attention to read the directions, I've made that mistake before. And at one point I seem to recall, partway through the process, realizing that the accounts needed to match. Because I had been logged into one account before and getting that no symbol, so I couldn't get at the other accounts, right? And realizing that they needed to match, and not thinking about Migration Assistant. So what I did, and this does not work, by the way, I'll give people a fair warning. Well, it works, but you have to be very careful about it. I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll create my new user account with the same username and everything, and then I'll just copy the stuff over. Well, here's the problem that I ran into. If you make any mistake at all in that username and creating that account, if it doesn't match exactly, you still get the same situation. For example, let's say that my user account is named Jake, okay, on the old machine. On the new machine, I create a name Jake, but I leave an extra space.
Right.
Or maybe the J was capitalized on one and it's not capitalized on the other. To the machine, those are not the same.
Exactly.
And so when you log in, because they don't match, you won't be able to get at those other files because the machine is going, wait a minute, this Jake is not the same as this Jake. He has no business seeing these files.
Right.
And it took me a little while to figure out what to do.
Yeah, so, and another problem that I've seen, and I'm not sure, I'm trying to remember whether I've experienced it because I've done this myself. The files migrate over into the new account, and one of the little tricks that happens in there is that particularly if you're coming from a Windows environment to OS X and OS X environment, one of the problems is that permissions have to be assigned to the files, which are not necessarily assigned in Windows. And OS X says, you're creating a new account using these files from this old system, and so I'm going to give that new account the permissions to those files, which is part of the security system of OS X, and therefore the account that I created myself can't get access to the file that Migration Assistant created because it's a different user, different permissions. And even if I take the step of putting them through the shared folders, which you can do, you can log into that now new account with all your files in it and move them to the shared account and then move them again into wherever you want them to go. I think there's some residual permissions issues that can creep up in some of those files in that.
I have done that before, and last week I did suggest that kind of as a last resort kind of thing, to do something like that. But I think you're right. There are some instances with certain types of files where permissions become an issue. And so, yeah, I did suggest to people that as a look, to me, the best solution is to take any files that you've created in that new user account. Hopefully you notice it quickly. Take any files in that new user account, put them somewhere safe like a flash drive, and just blast that old account, blast that new account to Kingdom Come, and start all over again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you'd be better off in the long run if you did it that way, probably because you'd end up rerunning Migration Assistant at the right time. The file would come into your right account, and you wouldn't have the permissions issues. And then you just have to restore whatever you had done in the new back to that account. I was thinking that perhaps a better way for Apple to have written the documentation would be to say, if you don't use Migration Assistant now, the account you're about to create will not be your permanent one, and let people think about it in those terms. Because now what you can do is create a temporary playing account, log in that, learn how OS X works, but OS X works, but don't get committed to anything. And then when you run Migration Assistant, lo and behold, Jake gets created because that's what it was on the PC.
That's what you wanted to be in the first place.
That's what you wanted to be in the first place, and the one you created just to play with is totally useless and gone away.
Well, actually, you know what I would do? Because let's say you're in that situation, and you're right, that's a good approach. The one exception, the one difference that I would make is that account's going to have to be an admin account because your Mac has to have at least one admin account.
Yep.
And in my mind, rather than deleting that account when you move Jake over, rather than deleting that account, keep it.
Yeah,
give it a name like Play or Troubleshooting or whatever when you create it, but keep it.
Yep.
Because there are some times when, for troubleshooting purposes, you need to know, is the problem that I am experiencing hardware, or is it software driven like a corrupt preference? Well, if the only time that you log into this account is in those kinds of situations, it's going to be a pretty pristine user account. If you look at the difference, your old user account may be multiple gigabytes worth of stuff.
Right.
And this one will be a few hundred megabyte at most,
Exactly.
And so that I had not been doing that because I'd always had an account for me and an account for my wife. I stopped doing that when she reached the conclusion that she likes using Macs unless they are Macs that I am also using. For two reasons. One, we both use the computer a lot.
Right.
And two, I cannot resist the temptation to improve things.
Yes.
And so I will set something up that makes no sense to her. Makes perfect sense to me.
Yes.
So even from the earliest days of OS X, I've always had a second account, even though the last time that she used Macs consistently was either when the PC blew up or before that, OS 9, which didn't really handle multiple accounts very well.
Right.
And then one day I was trying to decide whether to create a second account, and I remember reading, there's a guy, I want to say his name is Bob Levitas. He calls himself Dr. Mac. And that's where I ran across his tip about setting up a second user account, even if you're the only one using it, and logging into that when you have trouble so that you could differentiate a hardware problem versus a software issue.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a terrific tip for any user. Even now, if your system is all cluttered up, just go create one clean, pristine, brand new user, and at least then you can go into that account and launch whatever application it is that's giving you a problem and see whether it's a plist that's unique to you or a plist that's generic across the system, or as you said, whether it's in hardware. At least it gives you some indication whether the problem is in my account or more generic.
Right. Right. And so, like I say, last week should have been the Jake show because you know, those that's a great example of why it is that we need all of our members contributing and communicating. The two things that you mentioned, I knew the one about Migration Assistant. I just couldn't think of a good way to communicate what the problem was. And the one with iTunes, I'm sitting there after I read your post and going, holy cow, I never thought to do it that way. I mean, I'd had that problem before. It
Right.
just never dawned on me that that was a good solution, you know?
Yeah, I mean, my wife tells me I think sideways every once in a while, which doesn't hurt, I guess, because you come up with strange answers to problems. But, I mean, the idea of the community that we have there in the forums is fantastic, because I've been coming since 2008 as one of the very first forums about Macs that I got into after I took the iMac home and put it on my desk and said, okay, now what? And I've been coming back ever since. And the help there is more friendly than any place I've ever been. It reminds me of an old collection of guys back in the BBS days. I don't know if you go far enough back to remember dial-in BBS.
I didn't use them a lot, but mainly because I didn't have a modem at that time.
Well, I was, small funny story, I was hosting a BBS for folks who had built basically an H100 S100 bus computer from Heathkit. It was a
Okay.
Zenith Z100. It was a magnificent beast. And back in the days of I think we ran CPM on it, as I recall. Anyway, the old
You could actually get a CPM card that would run in the Apple II, which amazed the heck out of me.
Well, and I installed a CPM card in a TRS-80 Radio Shack Model 1.
Oh my God!
You could do that too. It was ugly, but you could make it work.
My wife had one of those. TRS-80. No, it was my roommate in college. He had a TRS-80.
Yep.
She had the Tandy 1000.
Okay. Well,
was
moved
the
on.
bigger
Much fancier machine.
Yeah.
But you know, I forget where we were. I mean, the bottom line is that in the old BBS days, you depended upon everybody else on the BBS to help you out of a problem at 300 baud, because that's what modems were in those days.
Right.
And so you'd post, you know, you'd come onto the BBS and say, this is my problem, what do I do? And somebody else would read it on the BBS. I got a visit from the police because they wanted to know why I was running 10 phone lines in my house. They thought maybe I was a bookie. But I was hosting this BBS, and I showed it to them, and they said, oh, okay, maybe you're not a bookie, and they all
That's
laughed.
pretty good.
That was pretty good. Nice guys, but, you know, they... So anyway, I haven't seen a forum that's been as friendly as as we are since those
Right.
BBS days, because we're all it's the friendliest, and there's no real attacking. I mean, there's occasionally people snipe at one another, but not nearly like
No.
it can be out in other places.
And I'll tell you, my the only other forum that I've spent a significant amount of time with that had a similar attitude among the users is a forum. It's called Mac OSG. It originally started as G5 OSG, and it apparently is now defunct. Unfortunately, the one of the principals behind it passed away here a little while ago, and I think no one's carried it forward. But what you saw happen is when I first signed up, maybe I drove everybody away, because when I first signed up, you would get, you'd pull up the list of new posts, and there would be 20 or 30, at a time popping up as new, and then as gradually over the years, fewer and fewer, to the point that right before it went under, I sometimes would log in, once a month or once every couple of months, and there would be maybe 10 posts that, 10 threads that were new.
Right.
And then by contrast, and my wife was the first one that pointed this out to me. She's a gamer, and she's gone on to a couple of game forums on the PC side. And one of the things that's impressed her for the most part is that very few of the PC forums that she has gone to have that kind of attitude. They all have the sniping and the the trolls and the the horrible behavior that you just go, why would anybody want to come to this forum and ask a question for help if they're going to get that kind of behavior?
Exactly. I mean, and you see it every once in a while when you see a new guy coming into the switcher network. They post, "Hey, I've got a problem. Don't shoot me." And we don't shoot people. All we ever do is go back and say we need more information.
Right.
I mean I wish there was a way to say before you post, you have to read this, how to write a post. That wonderful how to write a quality post, because that's key.
We were talking about that in one of the threads. It may be in the moderator section. I don't remember. About how could you possibly get people to read that before they post, because many times when you look at the first several posts in a thread, it's someone posts a question, and then it's one of the forum members trying to explain what missing information that we need.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, it's either because English is not the poster's primary language, but it can also be because, if you're just starting out, you don't know what's important, relevant information.
Absolutely.
And the computer to me is like, anthropologists talk about tool use as being an important hallmark in human culture. And to me, the computer is the ultimate in tool use, because it's a hunk of plastic and silicon and metal until you load the software.
Right.
And then it becomes a calculator, a typewriter, an easel, you name it. And here's the problem. You can be very fluent in one aspect of using the computer and not so very fluent in another. And so you go to post a problem, maybe it's your first time using a word processor or something, and you go to post a question and you don't know what the important information is that people need to know.
True. I mean, part of it is being able to explain the problem. But right. I do think there are some posts that are just beyond the pale in terms of being cryptic, like, it doesn't work, help. I've seen some that didn't contain a whole lot more information.
Yeah. Is it plugged in?
Yeah. And so, I mean, the idea is that it would be nice, since if anybody's out there listening and you're thinking about posting something, we need to know what the machine is, what the operating system is, what the release of the software is. 9 times out of 10, if something changed, it's something you did. And so what did you last do to the machine before this thing started doing that? As innocuous as it might seem, all I did was turn it off, or all I did was pull the USB stick out, or all I did was, it's the all I did are 9 times out of 10 pointers to where the problem is.
Sure.
And you just gotta be, and we're not asking to be nosy. We're just asking so that we can get down to help you solve the problem.
We've even had a few in the in the thread about posting, in some of the threads about liquid spills.
Right.
Somebody posts about keyboards, and then we get halfway through the thread and they say, "Oh yeah, I spilled soda on the machine 2 weeks ago."
Yeah, could that be it?
I hate to say it, but that's probably the root of the problem.
Yeah, and the other one is that lately we've been seeing a lot of posts in the forums about adware, and oh my gosh, I've got a virus. All these ads are popping up in my browsers, and what do I do? How do I get rid of them all? And then it turns out, oh yeah, well, by the way, is this important that I went to, I did this, or I wanted to watch
Pirate Bay, and I did,
I wanted to watch this video, so I let it install, or I needed to download a file, and I installed a helper, a booster file, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where the crapware is.
Problem is.
We have found.
And you know, even for me, as I say, I've been using Macs consistently since the early '90s, and even now, I still encounter things that are new to me,
Mm-hmm.
and had I not read them on the forum, could have created a huge problem for myself.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I read through almost every thread every day, because I learn something every day at the forum. You know,
Oh yeah,
you never know everything, and the guys on the forum are amazing. You know, because
and you know, it really is true that I look now. Dennis, for example, D. Travis,
right?
Van Smith,
Yep.
Nick, and Harry. Sometimes I read their posts, and I think to myself, how in the world do they remember all of this stuff? You know, Harry is like a walking encyclopedia of that first generation Mac Pro.
Right.
And I owned one of those beasts, okay? In fact, the carcass of it is still sitting in my living room because I can't, it's dead, but I just can't force myself to heave it out the front door. And every once in a while, somebody will ask a question about that machine. And it's something that I should know because I was always tinkering with the machine, and I go, oh, God, I don't remember that. What the heck is the answer to that?
Right.
And then before I Google and find the answer, Harry will come back and say, oh, you got to do this, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Or you did this wrong. Go back and do it this way. I'm like, how in the heck did he remember that?
Well, and then you get some guy that's buried down in the arcane science of terminal commands, and Craig Dominguez will pop up and say, oh, here's what you want to do. Just enter this command, and all your problems will be, solved. And I go, where on earth,
Craig and Van have been trying to get me to force feed terminal on me almost since the day I joined the forum, and I keep telling them, it gives me the hives. Because, and being around computers as long as you have, you will understand this. When my wife was first teaching, I guess maybe her second or third year, they had put in several computers in the school that she was working at, and some of them had DOS 5. You know, these were standalone computers, and they're running DOS 5. They weren't even running Windows. And one of her coworkers accidentally went to the command line one day and typed in DEL star dot star. Okay, yep. He's at the root level of the drive. Now,
right.
In DOS 6, it would not cannibalize itself. It would not let you do that.
Right.
But in 5 point whatever this was,
it was happy.
Under certain circumstances, it was perfectly happy to start deleting stuff. Right. You know, and every time I go to type in a terminal command, I think about that, and there are people out there who say, I saw this terminal command on a website, it says that it fixed the problem, and I typed it in. Well, that's okay, but you really need to know where that terminal command came from.
Exactly.
Because if it was somebody that had a malicious intent, okay,
yep,
you could really mess things up.
Yep, and particularly if you can't read the terminal command for yourself and at least sort of understand what it's about to do. I mean, rm minus rf is not a good command to enter at the root level.
If it begins with rm, that's probably not good.
Probably not good. So it's just you have to be careful what you do, and you're right. I'm leery of just entering. Now, if I'm able to copy and paste it from a trusted source someplace, then I can copy and paste it where not even my typos can make a mistake.
Right.
Okay, I'll run it and see what happens. But I'm not comfortable in the terminal. The funny thing is that I used to have a guy working for me who had worked on developing Unix for the old Bell Labs, where Unix was originally developed, and he showed up at where I was the boss of this certain organization, and I hired him, and he showed up as a magic little 7-inch reel of tape. And on there it had every Unix trick in the planet. He could make Unix sing and dance. And it was that same place. We wanted to build a firewall between the administrative computers and the engineering department. And
Right.
we bought a tiny little box, as I recall, it was a HP box running HPUX, and he had the right commands that built a firewall that you could not get through because it sensed anybody trying to penetrate it, and you got beyond a certain level of penetration, it would burn itself to the ground. And every once in a while, we'd come in the morning, and there'd be this box lying on its side, disk wiped out slick, and all the communications to the outside world chopped because the firewall burned to the ground. And it only took a few minutes to get it back to where it was because it's a very simple box.
Right.
It's just, you can do a lot of stuff with command lines that probably more than the average user ought to be, which makes me nervous when I see guys saying, hey, here's a fix for you, unless it's coming from a trusted source like we have a few of them at the forum. But I hate it when I see guys go, well, I don't know much about terminal, but I went to flybynight.com and I got this line of code and I entered it and it didn't fix my problem, and now I've got this mess going on, and hey, you sort of brought it on yourself.
I've done that with AppleScript, for example, because I'm poking around with AppleScript a little bit here and there, and I've pasted commands into the AppleScript editor and run them. But generally speaking, I can kind of puzzle out what the command is going to do.
Right.
And because of running Time Machine, I generally have a pretty current backup.
Right.
So, it would be a pain in the butt, but I can get back to where I'm going, which is why I love cloning software like Carbon Copy Cloner.
Right. Yep.
Or Super Duper. I mean, to me, that was the greatest thing because at one point when I was writing for about this particular Mac, I generally had a hard drive that had the current OS on it as soon as I could afford it, because in those days it was no free. It was $150, every time you made a major change. Well, I would wait a couple of months, mainly because of budget constraints, but by then all the bugs were kind of known, and so I had, because we would get this software sometimes that we needed to do reviews for and things like that. So I always had one drive partition that was the current OS, and one that was the previous iteration, say 10.5 and 10.4.
Right.
And because sometimes you would get a piece of software that it would run on one of those and not on the other because of some feature. And so I always knew that I could get back at least to the older OS and get myself back. But that's a time-consuming process, even with Time Machine now.
Right.
Because the limitation there is that it takes a while to transfer all the data. It's not that Time Machine is hard to use. That's a lot of data to have to move from your backup to your main computer, especially if you're functioning at USB speeds.
Yep. USB 2 in particular gets really ugly.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's nice to be able to go back to right before you shot yourself in the foot, but it's usually not quite shoot yourself in the foot if you can get away with it. Just maybe you ought to be, and if you don't know what you're doing, I mean, I see a lot of guys in the switcher area that are saying, hey, don't know much about Macs, but I went and did this, and gee, it didn't work the way it did in Windows. Yep, that's right, because it's not. Right,
it doesn't.
It doesn't work the same.
Same as Windows, they would call it Windows.
Exactly, and so every once in a while, I don't write it out because I'm afraid I'm going to hit post, but I just occasionally type out in my mind, get over it, learn the way of doing business, and it isn't Windows. But the bottom line is you do have to, it's not good or bad, it's just different. And you got to learn a different way, and you got to do it Apple's way. And the way OS 10 is written, you got to do it the way OS 10 is. And I don't care how good it was under Windows or how much you liked it under Windows, That's not the way it works. You just got to
And
live.
there are some things. There have been things that I've liked about the way Windows operates.
Oh yeah.
Not very much, but there've been a few things here and there that I like. And I will say that as Windows has progressed, because I started using Windows off and on with Windows 3.1 and was using DOS 5 before then. So, I've been at least familiar with them for a while. And with each iteration, Windows has gotten a little more user-friendly.
Mm-hmm.
I had a good friend who was using Windows 3.1 on a Tandy machine, and I could not make him understand. Okay, at that time, Windows had this concept of they had the file manager and they had the program manager. If you wanted to launch a program, you had to be in the program manager. You wanted to find a file, you had to be in the file manager.
Right.
And I was running an Apple II, running a GUI. It was like System 6.0 or something like that. That was not an issue.
Right.
The Finder in 6.0 was very similar to the Finder on a Mac, so you didn't have to worry about, am I launching a program or am I opening a file? You went, you found what you were looking for, you clicked on it.
Right.
And it took me forever to make him understand why I thought that this distinction between a program and a file was irrelevant. Because,
right.
Because from the computer standpoint, they're all files.
Exactly. Yeah.
And from a user standpoint, I don't really care which one I have to click on. I just need to get to my stuff.
Yeah.
And it really took him a long time to get a handle on why I thought Windows 3.1 was cumbersome.
Yeah, and there's a discussion, I think, currently going on. I saw it this afternoon. I haven't been back to see how it's progressed, where a fella came in and said, he wanted to be able to clean up behind his uninstalls. That he knew from Windows that as you installed and uninstalled programs, over time Windows got cluttered and slowed down. Yeah. And he wanted to know how to do all that cleanup. Now you can do that cleanup, but my experience is that the most anything gets left behind might be a couple of K. plist gets somewhere, some file. It never gets opened again because the app is gone. You've deleted the app.
Right.
It's a hanger-on configuration file somewhere, and they're usually fairly small. And
one of my friends has a hard time believing that I have literally gone an entire year or more in most cases
on
my Mac without doing a complete reinstall, without doing a nuke and pave.
Yep.
And the idea that I will go from system, say, 10.6.8 to 10.7 to 10.8 to 10.9 and not do a nuke and pave anywhere in there unless I was having a problem.
Right. I think the last nuke and pave I did was when I took this MacBook Pro that I've got and I pulled out the hard drive and put in an SSD in its place, and I nuked and paved and rebuilt the system from scratch.
From scratch.
Yeah, and that's the last one I did, and that's been a very long time ago. So but if you're a Windows guy, if you're just coming in from the Windows environment, you still got it in your mind that the OS itself consumes a lot of your time because you have to do all this maintenance stuff. Right. And there's debris left behind in the registry. There is no registry. That's the biggest thing I think Windows users have to get away from.
There is no registry.
There is, and it doesn't slow down this. When you delete an app, the little tiny files that get left behind, the configuration files, never get opened, never get processed by the operating system. They have zero impact on you because the app's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard concept, I think, for a lot of the Windows users to get to. And they want to clean it up, but what about, won't it clutter up my hard drive? Not really. I think I posted.
In the days when a large hard drive was 200 megabyte.
Yeah.
Or correction, the very first hard drive I ever owned cost me $600. It was for my Apple II GS. And it was a combination hard drive and power supply in one unit.
Right.
40 megabyte drive.
Yep.
That cost $600.
Yeah.
Now,
Oh,
if you got a lot of stuff on a 40 megabyte drive,
yes.
yeah,
Then
okay, maybe, yeah,
but if I've got a, I think my internal drive is 480 gigabytes. At 480 gigabytes, even if I install and uninstall 500 programs, and each one of them is 2K of debris left behind in the uninstall, that's still only a meg. It's hardly messing with it,
right,
and it doesn't
right.
slow down the operating system. There's no registry that gets cluttered up. It doesn't slow down at boot time. It just ignores that stuff because the
Now,
app.
I went through a period of time here a couple of months ago. I have a 480 gig SSD in my MacBook Pro. I have a 2008 MacBook Pro, and I put an SSD in it. And about a month ago, I noticed, okay, wait a minute. I've got several gigabyte here less than I thought I had. What is going on? Why do I not have this space? And, if it had been a few hundred K or a megabyte or two, I wouldn't have worried about it. But since you're looking at gigabytes of information, I started looking. And then I realized what had happened. When I set up, I never did get Windows 7 running off of Boot Camp, and now I know why, because I had taken out my CD drive and put the hard drive in the drive bay. Windows doesn't like it when you do that because I had a Windows DVD instead of a flash drive, which is no big deal to me. I don't use Windows that often. So what I did is I went ahead and used Parallels and set up a virtual machine, which I had done before anyway. And I had intended to put the virtual machine file on that second hard drive that's sitting in the bay. And I hadn't been paying close enough attention, and of course Parallels by default created the file on the SSD.
Right.
And I had one of those for Win 7 and one of those for Win 8. So between the two of them, they were consuming a decent chunk of data, and I managed to get them moved from there to the other hard drive and just clear them out, because not so much because I was concerned about the loss of space, because I still had more than enough space. It's just I didn't want it there cluttering up the SSD. There was no reason to have it on the SSD.
Right.
And I don't run it often enough to notice the performance hit.
Exactly. I mean, I have much the same setup on this MacBook Pro. I boot off the SSD now. Through a series of interesting adventures, I ended up with two SSDs, two 480 gigabyte SSDs, and so I put one of those in the drive bay, and one of them is my boot drive.
Right.
And so the boot one is named Macintosh SSD, and the other one's named, I think I named it Internal HD or something like that, just so I could tell the two apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that I ended up putting most of my media over on the second one and freeing the first one to just be the boot drive and working like that. But even when it was a hard drive, before I put the second SSD in there, it was hard to tell a speed difference as long as you weren't trying to run a very, very large application or do a big Photoshop file or doing something ridiculously huge, render some video or something from the hard drive. You didn't notice that the decay in speed going to a 7200 drive. So I'm not sure that having two SSDs is that much of a performance break, but it basically turned my 17-inch MacBook Pro into a 17-inch MacBook Air because it has no moving parts in it at all.
Yeah, there you go.
And it boots up in a heartbeat when I take it out on the road, so it's a big toy. But most of the time, that's the other thing that my Windows friends don't understand. They ask, I had a Windows friend came in and the system was all set up here, and I showed him it was running. He said, "Do you leave it running?" I said, "Yeah, pretty much 24/7. It runs. No reason to shut it down. And if I do have to shut it down, I just close the clamshell and walk off with it." And he said, "Well, don't you have to reboot? Doesn't it crash?"
No.
No, it just runs,
Yeah, I don't have to reboot that often,
No. The only thing I do, and we've suggested this a couple of times on the forum, is run Onyx about once every 6 months.
Yeah.
And just say, clean out the cache, clean out the logs, clean
Uh-huh.
out. That is debris that can slow your system down. If
Sure.
the cache files get too big or the log files get too big, that will slow your
Mhm.
system down. So
Right.
a good flush with Onyx about once every 6 months is all it needs.
And it takes 5 minutes, you know. And
Exactly. And most of those 5 minutes are waiting for it to run its own self-check on the drive before it even starts to do anything.
right.
Smart tests and so forth.
Consequence, yeah.
It doesn't require as much maintenance as the old Windows machines, and that's the hardest thing I think for switchers to catch on to when they're brand new into the environment. You mean I don't have to do all this? No, you don't have to do all that. Just play with it. It's a toy.
So did you get bitten by the iOS 8 update that didn't quite work?
I did not. I couldn't download 801, and I downloaded 802, and it's working fine for me.
I
But
was about to download 801 when I started seeing some of the reports of problem, so I didn't. And some of the stuff that I've read kind of suggests that maybe 801 was a problem if you were running on the iPhone 6. That
Yeah.
you were more likely to have a problem on the iPhone 6 than on, say, some of the iPads that can run. And, you know, unless Dave decides to buy me an iPhone 6 as a birthday present, it may be a while before I get one of those bad boys, you know.
Yeah, I've got a 5S, and I'm not eligible for a 6 until next year.
Oh wait, I know what you can get me. I have a birthday coming in November. I know what you can get me for my birthday.
All right.
Today I was over on the Cult of Mac website.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I'll post the link in the notes. There's a couple things over on the Cult of Mac site that were kind of interesting. One of them talked a little bit about handoff and this app data sharing with, you know, we were talking about handing off phone calls and passing data, and it gave you just a real quickie overview, not very technical at all for those that might be interested in what that feature is. But the other thing, I just had to read this. It was a thing about, and something in my brain keeps telling me that this has got to be a fake. That for between 5,000 and 130,000, you can get a 24-karat gold iPhone 6. That there's some company that has figured out a way to do this, and you know, there are all these people with more money than sense, I suppose, and a buttload more disposable income than I do. So I won't be greedy here, Jake. I'll take the $5,000 model. I don't even need the 130 grand one.
Yeah, that's what I like about you, Sly. It's that humbleness to be willing to take the lower end there.
I'm willing to, you know, I'll be perfectly happy with the $5 grand model. Yeah. I don't need the 130. And they said one of the reasons the 131 was it has diamonds in it.
I would hope.
And jewelers can only get so many of those diamonds each day.
Ah.
So it has room for, I think it's like 5,000 of these, and they can only get 100 a day.
Right.
Only 100 a day. I mean, you know, hey. And this guy swears, and something just rings to me like this is a joke. Like nobody would really pay this much for a phone. But the guy said what got him started on this was somebody that he's some kind of engineer or something, and somebody that he knew got a hold of one of the iPhones that had been gold-plated.
Right.
And it didn't look as good as he expected it. And so this guy keeps thinking, well, okay, I can do better. And he started doing this, and he found that celebrities can, you know, I think the iPhone 4 was supposedly the first one he did. See, I'd even take a gold-plated 4, you know, well, 4S, so I could get iOS 8 on it.
Okay.
Yeah, you know.
Well, and that's...
I'm not picky.
Yeah, there are people with more money than brains that are willing to do that, and that's okay. I'm not in that category, so I will just wait until...
I just wanted to let you know that, just in case you knew somebody that, you know, might give you...
If I run across anybody with spare cash, I'll send them your way.
You got an anniversary coming, you know, nice anniversary present or something. You know.
Hey, listen, this has been fun, but I need to run. I see
I
my.
was just thinking the same thing. I have a couple of, I've got the football game going in the background here, the Cowboys and the Saints. But I've got a couple other things I need to do for this evening. Um, while I've got you chained to the chair here, um, you should really think about joining us every week.
Well, I will try to do that. My Sunday nights usually get a little bit busy, but
Yeah.
I'll see if I can do that.
We usually start about the same time, and
Okay.
we're not locked down to that time. You know, we might be able to shift things a little bit. Um, this started just because we used to have a thing where everybody gathered on Sunday night in IRC,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of petered out. And then Van said, well, you know, maybe we should do it as a video chat. And so it's so much nicer when you have somebody else, and they don't have to listen to me bloviate for 45 minutes or an hour, you know.
Listen to me bloviate.
So, well, you know, hey, you know, and you've got some interesting experiences, and you're a pretty knowledgeable Mac person, and Dave's usually here when he's not out enjoying his retirement, and so, you know, feel free to join in, and
I appreciate the offer. I'll put it on my calendar, and I'll be here the days that I can.
all righty, sounds good. And that's going to do it for this week, guys. We're glad to have Jake with us. I thoroughly enjoyed it, which explains why it went on a little bit longer than I thought it was going to. But that's okay. I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as Jake and I have enjoyed doing this. And until then, this is going to be the end of the September 28th Mac Forum video chat. I'll see you next week, and hopefully Jake will be here also.
Thank you.